an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering King of Scars, the rest of Chapter 6, and Chapters 7, 8, and 9, Zoya, Nina, and Nikolai. In these chapters, Nikolai's whole situation is just getting worse and worse to the point where he very nearly kills Zoya. Except, did he try and kill Zoya? Was that sums up? I don't like it. I don't like the implications of any of this. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Joanna for commissioning this episode. Again, apologies to Joanna for having to cut off a little bit. I didn't even cut off early. I went overtime, but I didn't get to finish the 6th chapter. But it winds up feeling, in my opinion, like it goes really well, the remainder of the 6th chapter, with what happens in chapter 7, 8, and 9. Because the remainder of it is mostly conversations about what women are potential options for Nikolai. And almost all of them, he has either a totally valid or a highly questionable reason for not wanting to ally with these women. Sometimes it's just a simple thing, like they're too young or they're too old. There are some people who have alliances that he doesn't necessarily see that much of a benefit about. And I love when Zoya says something about one of our most ideal prospects. She's young, amiable, wildly popular among her own people, very gifted on the katur, which is an instrument, I am assuming, because he says 12 strings or 18. Why does it matter? It's important to have standards, Nazyalensky. I really love that, because that is one of those things that, I've been recently reading a bunch of Jane Austen again. Some of it again, but there were some new ones in there that I had never read. And the pianoforte as being a mark of a woman's accomplishment comes up frequently. And I find it very amusing whenever it's mentioned because it's one of those things where in these social situations where women are taught musical instruments as a means of their education to find a husband, I don't get the impression from any of the gatherings that I see in these stories that once they are married, they ever play an instrument again. So I always wonder what the point is of that. And I guess that's his point also. But what kind of is the most interesting about this is getting to see what he felt about Alina. And Zoya is kind of smiling to herself and says something like, I know you're not still pining over the loss of our sun saint. And it says, of course he was. He liked Alina. Maybe because he'd even started to love her. And maybe some arrogant part of him had simply expected her to say yes. He was a king, after all, and a passable dancer. But she'd known the Darkling better than anyone. Maybe she'd sensed what was festering inside him. Years had passed, and yet her rejection still stung. It's so amusing to me that instead of it just being she was in love with somebody else, it has to be this she could sense the darkness in me because of her bond with the Darkling. Dude, there's no need to be dramatic. She loved somebody else. It's fine. It's just I just love how Mal isn't even a factor in his question, because Nikolai is so confident that any other dude would never hold a candle to him or be any kind of threat. So it had to be something about him being a monster, because her preferring Mal, it's just unthinkable. Literally, he doesn't even think it. That is an energy I would love to be able to carry all day. So then, Elk Marie Smith's parents will marry her off, probably to some merchant. I'm sure she'd be better pleased with a king. No. Next, Natasha Baratrova. It's always weird to see my own name and stuff because it doesn't come up often. And that is a 50-year-old baroness. Their girl who was too young was 16. And at this point, she says, Linnea Opger. He says no out of hand, and she protests that he's saying no to everybody. This woman's very beautiful, accomplished, etc. And he says, I'd expect nothing less of my half-sister. And here comes a really interesting moment. This is a confirmation from him that he is indeed a bastard. And he has never actually admitted it before. The only person that he has told is Alina. And he's not even entirely sure why he's confessing this to Zoya now. And he shows her the portrait that his mother gave him of the man who is actually his father. This is a really great bit here. Saints, the likeness, striking, I know. Looking at the miniature was like gazing into the future, at a Nikolai grown a bit older, a bit graver, with lines at the corners of his eyes. Zoya hurled it into the fire. I agree wholeheartedly. Would I have done this? No. I am not that kind of badass. But I would definitely be like, I'm taking this. I wouldn't leave it around in a place that, like, would be targeted to be searched if someone was going to try and fuck with your shit. I don't know where I would put it, but I sure wouldn't leave it lying around in desk drawers, you know? And she chucks it. He is like, just like, Zoya. And she says, what kind of fool are you? That portrait was as good as a loaded gun pointed at your heart. Ravka's heart. And you would risk it all for what? Stupid sentiment? And he basically tries to tell her that she's out of line. She doesn't get to talk to him like this because he's king. And she's like, yeah, you are. You should have handled it like a king. But I'm out here having to do the shit you should have done because I want you to stay king, which evidently you're not really that committed to. I'm sworn to protect you. I had every fucking right to do that. I love her. I just do. I love her so much. I just love her so much. And then he says, what if Magnus Opger came to this palace or was invited to some banquet? All it would take is a single glance for people to know. And she suggests that they kill him. And Nikolai is really upset and tells her that if she does do anything, and he suspects that she was involved, he says, I will strip you of your rank and you can spend the rest of your days teaching Grisha children how to make cloud animals. And his only crime was loving my mother. And she says, no, his crime was bedding your mother. Nikolai shook his head. Leave it to Zoya to cut right to the truth. Of course, he had no way of knowing if there had ever been love between his mother and his true father, but he hoped there had been something more than lust and regret. And I really appreciated that she's like, I'm not trying to condemn a man for love. I'm trying to condemn a man who slept with the king's fucking wife. Dude. Slightly different. Just a tad. And I have to imagine, like, in most monarchies, if the queen has an affair, that's essentially treason, right? That's usually considered treason. So I have to assume that the man who sleeps with the queen is also committing treason. That just stands to reason, right? I'm not sure how that, winds up working out in reality, but I assume for sure. So Finally, it's time for them to go lock him in chains and head to bed. Now, I keep thinking about this, guys, about Nikolai having to be locked up. And I don't know, have you guys ever tried to sleep in one position all night? Like, I have recently had a couple of, like, sort of facial things, like, what am I trying to say? Like, I can't remember the name of the treatment that I got. But it basically was like a little bit of, like, skin refresh on my face. And I was not supposed to lay with my face against the pillow the night that I got it done. And I was meant to sit up against my pillows, and I just couldn't fall asleep because I sleep on my side, and that's how I fall asleep. And this poor dude is not even just having to lay on his back all night, but his arms are like up and chained. His feet are chained to the bottom of the bed, so he can't shift position at all. That sucks. And as it turns out, he can get out of those chains. How? I don't see him picking his own chains. Whether he has the ability to pick locks or not, just getting into the position to do it doesn't seem like it would be possible. Somebody is doing this somehow. I don't know how. I don't know if somebody's just manifesting in his room, if it's part of like magic or what. But I feel like there is another party involved in all of this that we're not seeing. And I don't think it's the Darkling. Like, there's a suggestion that his power remains. And there's almost a suggestion that it's his voice speaking out of Nikolai's mouth when he's turned into the monster. But, like, I think it's really mostly that I don't want to believe the Darkling is still around. Because that feels so Voldemort-y, you know? I would rather it be like another person has a power like his somehow. I don't know. So she tugged on the special lock David had rigged. With a sudden clanking whir, 3 chains shot across his body at the knees, midriff, and shoulders. He was strong when the beast came upon him, and they could take no chances. So this is like even more, because his ankles and wrists are bound, yes, but these are additional on top of it. Again, I just don't see how he could pick his own locks. I don't see it. So he asks her what her plans for the evening are. And she says, I go a lot of places. If you keep prying into my personal life, I'll have some suggestions as to where you can go. Why keep your dalliance a secret? Is he an embarrassment? Nikolai flexed his fingers, trying to even his breathing. Zoya turned her head, and the lamplight caught the crescent of her cheekbone, gilding the dark waves of her hair. He'd never quite managed to make himself immune to her beauty, and he was glad his arms were chained to the bed, or he might have been tempted to reach for her. And later on, when she is letting him out in the morning, because this night isn't the one that he escapes, it's a later night, she can't help but notice how relaxed and tousled he looks in bed, and it's clear that she is attracted to him also. But they are both able to keep such a lock on it that they don't ever really reveal it to each other. I have to assume they each are confident enough in their own appearance that they have to assume the other is somewhat attracted. But I don't think either of them really realizes the extent of it, you know? So this is when he mentions her amplifier. And he asks whether or not this is cheating, the way that people are talking about Parem. And she sort of compares Parem to Merzost. Amplifiers are something else. They're rare creatures tied to the making at the heart of the world, the source of all creation, which we get a bit of the lore surrounding what people think these creatures might be, which was men with shape-shifting ability. But yeah, she says all Grisha feel the pull towards Merzost, the hunger to see just what we might do if we had no limits. Even you? A small smile touched Zoya's lips. Especially me. Power is protection. But the price for that particular kind of power is too high. When the Darkling tried to create his own amplifiers, the result was the fold. This is enough for me. He asks what, for the story of her amplifier, and she shuts down pretty quickly, and it's just like, no, you haven't earned that. It's time for bed. And he leaves. She leaves. Sorry, my bad. He would not tell her he was afraid to be left alone with the thing he might become. He would not ask her to leave the lamp burning, a child's bit of magic to ward off the dark, but he was relieved when she did it anyway. I really appreciated that. I have to assume that was purposeful, that she sort of knows. I almost feel like if I turned into something, I would want it to be in the dark so that I couldn't risk seeing myself in mirrors. But there's also a sense of, well, I'm realizing, oh, she left the light on and he didn't turn that night. Is that the difference? When she leaves the light on, does he not transform? Is that all it is? I like that. That's so simple, but I could see how people would overlook that as a trigger. That's just a theory I'm throwing out there now. Okay. I like it, so I'm going to go with it. We'll see what people say. So, we don't ever see where she, in these chapters, where she goes at night either, because there's a suggestion that she's, out having a dalliance, but I don't believe that. She's up to something else, and I think it's probably something far more personal, to be honest. Because I just imagine any dalliance of hers would not actually be personal in the way that it would be for most of us. But that's just my assumption about what Zoya is like. So she goes to have tea early in the morning. A week had passed since they'd arrived back at the capital, and to her relief, the king's monster had made no more appearances. Maybe they left the light on all those nights? I don't know. So, at this point, they are having breakfast, and Nadia and Tamar are here, and they report on 2 Karagud attacks. Karagud, I don't know if I'm saying that right, are the creatures that we saw in the Six of Crows duology that are Grisha who have been amplified with metal skeletons and extra armor and wings. They have been experimented on and turned into these things that are... There's a feeling of them being more than human here. And, obviously more than human, but maybe I want to say less than human, because it feels like they're being controlled. Sorry if you can hear my squeaky shoes. It was raining out and I went to get the mail. It feels like they're being controlled by somebody, their mind has been tampered with beyond just their bodies and abilities. So they have taken 3 Grisha from Sikurst and 8 south of Karevia. And the Grisha near Sikurst were traveling undercover. Either the Shu knew about the mission, or Nina was correct and these new soldiers really can somehow sniff out Grisha, finished Nadia. I completely forgot that was a thing. That makes them so much scarier. I have to assume what Nina has discovered, this factory, is where they're creating these things. But why is it all women and children's bodies? Do they not survive? Is it only men who seem to survive these experiments? I don't know if that's... Maybe it's a whole different thing. I don't know. So, yeah. They are talking for a minute about Nina and the fact that she tried to warn them. And Zoya's a little bit salty over the fact that Nina was sent away when she has such information and could be more useful nearby. But Tamar is well, Nina was lost in her grief. It will be good to be of use. What a consolation that will be when she's captured and executed, Zoya retorted. Yeah, I want Nina to get what's good for her, but I understand Zoya's position. She is a general for a reason. So there's some talk about what these things are. The metal that is used to make their, because they were able to gather a couple bodies and dissect them, basically. It's not just Grisha steel, it's an alloy. They're combining Grisha steel with ruthenium. It's less malleable, but more durable. It's extremely rare. There are only a few known deposits around the world. So Zoya is like, all right, we'll track the shipments of this material, and that is how we are going to find out where these people are being made. Maybe that's what's... I don't know. So this is when she heads on over to Nikolai's, and on the hike, she's thinking about the Darkling and just how betrayed she felt by him. I survived to lead the army he built and nearly destroyed. Zoya had vowed to make the Second Army a power to be reckoned with again. She'd gone deeper within the borders of Fjerda and Shu-Han, pierced the shores of the Wandering Isle and the frontiers of Novia Zem in search of Grisha who might wish to learn to fight and who might give their allegiance to Ravka. As Zoya strode through the Grand Palace halls to Nikolai's chambers, she cast a look at two servants lingering outside his door that sent them shrinking up against the wall like frightened anemones. She knew the way they sighed over their poor king. "He's never been the same since the war," they whispered, swooning and dabbing their eyes whenever he was near. She couldn't blame them. Nikolai was rich, handsome, and beset by a tragic past. Perfect daydream fodder. But with her luck, the king would ignore the suitable prospective brides she'd found, fall for a common housemaid, and insist on marrying for love. It was just the kind of contrary romantic nonsense he was prone to. I really love her just being like, oh God, he's being such a fucking girl. That's like very much the energy here. So they'd slipped back into an easy routine after the near disaster in Yvette's, but she could never quite accustom herself to this intimacy. The dawn quiet, the rumpled sheets, the tousled hair that made Nikolai look less a king than a boy in need of kissing. "Entertain me with lively tales of your childhood," he'd said to her. Zoya doubted the king would be amused by her stories. "Should I tell you about the old man my mother wanted to marry off to when I was 9 years old? Should I tell you what happened on my wedding day, what they tried to do to me, the damage I left in my wake?" And I really, really, really want to know some of that, Zoya. You don't need to get graphic, but I would like to know what you did to people. Because, anybody who's like going to be a rapist getting theirs, I'm absolutely interested in that story. I'm just saying. And I do think it's always like very telling finding out how the Grisha sort of snapped, how their powers came to be. We find out later on with Nina that hers was when a sort of bully was staying at the orphanage that she lived in and basically like stole an orange that she was meant to share with all the kids and ate it all himself. And then his friends gathered around her and started mocking her and like poking at her. And she caused them to sort of weirdly like lose their breath by squeezing on their lungs. And they wound up backing off. She didn't actually do anything to truly hurt them. It was just a momentary like, oh, it hurts. What is that? And gradually she did more things like just to sort of embarrass him or make him uncomfortable. But she was very conscious of not pushing it too far because she didn't want to be like him. Which I love that even like child Nina was aware of the road she could easily have gone down. And I really doubt Zoya carried that same sort of energy, especially considering it wasn't like a childish prank of some kids just being dicks. Somebody was trying to rape her. So that deserves a proportionally greater response. And I'm interested in hearing what it was. I want to know. So this is, they sit down and have their breakfast, and they're just sitting and chatting about the apparat. And in the midst of this, they get interrupted by Talmar and, or Tamar. Sorry, I always want to call him Talmar, and Tolia. And he is apparently clashing with some pilgrims that are outside the city walls. Well, when they go to see them, which Zoya strenuously recommends against, and she also really hates the apparat, and she wants him... She has like a similar feeling about him that I have, which is just we should have killed him when we had the chance. But Nikolai is of the opinion that while it would be great if he was out of the way because he just presents a stumbling block, there is also a kind of advantage to having his ear and being able to use him. And there's no viable way to get him out of the way that isn't going to make the, religious factions really angry. Anybody who's devoted is going to either see him as a martyr, or they'll rise up against the king and perhaps build on a faction that was small out of revenge or resentment, or, and I kind of appreciate his position there. And I feel like he's really trying to walk this line that like I said, understand Zoya's position, but I kind of side with him on this. And she is so apt to deal with conflict head on. And you can't always do that in politics, which is part of why I hate politics. And as she says it, the apparat has betrayed everyone who'd ever been foolish enough to trust him. He was a snake. And if she had her way, he and his priest guard lackeys would have been offered two choices after the Civil War: execution or exile. Yeah, I mean, I said it at the time that he wasn't going to be fucking done. I knew he was going to keep causing trouble, and here he is. And I get where she's coming from, and I feel really, in truth, the same way. But I can't help but acknowledge that Nikolai's is the right position. I just would rather do what Zoya wants to do. Zoya also would rather do what Zoya wants to do. So they head out there to the top of the wall, and they look over, and this moment is really... she is not ready to see the fact that the Darkling is being worshipped, essentially. Let's see, I'm trying to find this spot here where, as they passed over the bridge and into the streets, Zoya could hear the crowds outside the double walls. But it was only when they dismounted and reached the top of the battlements that she got a good look at the people gathered below. She heard her own gasp, felt shock travel through her like a slap. These were not the ordinary pilgrims who journeyed across the country to pay homage to their saints. They were not the sun cult that had grown up around Alina Starkov and that often came to the palace walls to honor her. These people wore black. The banners they raised were emblazoned with the sun in eclipse, the Darkling's symbol. They'd come here to praise the man who had torn Zoya's life apart. And this turns into a really interesting scene a little bit later when they wind up taking in this tiny little beanpole of a priest to talk. We will get there shortly. They call this the cult of the Starless Saint. That is a really interesting name. They don't include the title Darkling. And I have to think that's a political choice, right? Because they know that the name Darkling is just too loaded. So if they change the name, and that is like one of the fundamentals of like people who are attempting to erase history, is they recognize the emotional impact of certain words and they choose to cut those from the narrative and pretend that just because they changed the words, this isn't the exact same shit, and they go in to this like crowd of people. After, of course, talking to the apparat for a few minutes, but he's just like, they're heretics, and this whole thing, there's a kind of a confrontation in the end between him and Nikolai. If you let the priest guard loose, you risk causing a bloodbath and making a whole slew of new martyrs, which will only validate their cause. You cannot ask me to permit this heresy. Nikolai's voice was cold. I ask nothing. The apparat's already waxen face paled further. Forgive me, Your Highness, but you must understand this is not a matter for kings to decide. It is a battle for Ravka's very soul. I need Nikolai to use a particular advantage here, because this is something that if you read history, you know, was done by the more successful monarchs in the past. He needs to lean into the divine right thing. Now, look, I recognize he's a bastard and he is assuming everybody knows it. But I don't think if people like him enough that they are going to give that, like, that's how rumors work. If people like the person who's being accused enough to begin with, the rumor will carry that much less weight often, you know? And I mean, like, really like. It's a different thing to, you know, for somebody to be of importance and, you know, successful, because sometimes people want to see someone like that get brought low. But I think people have enough actual, like, affection for him that most people wouldn't give those rumors much weight. And if he leaned into the I am meant to be the ruler because of divine right, then I am actually the spiritual leader of Ravka, not the apparat. And I think that that could help him. I don't know how much it would do. I just want to see him attempt that, you know, that tactic and see what happens. So they go out there, and again with this wonderful moment of Nikolai doing what he does best. First of all, so diplomatic in the way he handles the crowd versus the way he speaks to the priest, whose name is Yuri. And also in the way that he's prepared for a whole situation here that is beyond what I think Zoya is aware he has set up, but I'm not positive if she knows. Like, there's not really a moment where they talk to each other about it. So I don't know, maybe Zoya does know, but I love this. He goes in close and is like, you know, joking around with the crowd, trying to sort of diffuse this tension. Yuri gets, like, he's still continuing to say what he was fucking saying, but the sight of Nikolai, like, rolling towards him as he's yelling about how the man's a traitor, it definitely has an effect on him. He gets very pale and he starts shaking. He keeps talking, but he's afraid. And Nikolai says, you may be swayed by the sniper's station behind that gentle knoll. Excellent spot for picnicking. Do you see it? With orders to burst your head like a summer melon if I lift my right hand. Nikolai raised his hand and the boy flinched, but the king merely adjusted the lapel of his coat. Oh, Nikolai. I would gladly be martyred. You won't be martyred, Yuri, is it? You'll be a mistake. That bullet will graze my shoulder, and I'll make sure to fall very dramatically to the ground. The shooter will confess to being an assassin who wished to murder the Lantsov king. Maybe he'll even say he was loyal to the cause of the Starless saint. But that's preposterous, the monk sputtered. Is it more preposterous than the king of Ravka putting himself in the path of a sniper's bullet in order to rid the kingdom of an upstart monk? Because that, my friend, is quite a story. Come to breakfast. My cook makes a marvelous pork loin. And I was like, for breakfast? I'm down. I am always here for people who eat regular food at breakfast. I don't eat meat. Of course you don't, Zoya said. It's animals you object to killing, not people. Ah, Zoya. She managed to keep her mouth shut, but only up until a point. And she asks a couple of times whether she can pull the air from his chest and crush his lungs like hollow gourds. And Nikolai is like, no, I'm sure he has a mother to miss him, right, Yuri? Nice woman. Lives in Valchenko. Yuri touched his hand to his chest as if the king had struck him. Apparently Tamar's spies had gathered plenty of intelligence on this boy. I know, said Nikolai, patting the monk on the shoulder. Most disconcerting to realize you're gambling with lives other than your own. Shall we? That is a really good line. That's one of those lines that it carries a lot of weight because it comes across as sort of snarky, but it, I think, is probably sincere. Nikolai knows what it's like to realize he's gambling with lives other than his own. I'm sure he has had that kind of moment himself and just is seeing it, and, so he's like reveling in his checkmate a little bit, but there also is, I think, some sincere sympathizing going on there. So he tells this guy to come in for breakfast, and the dude finally agrees, but it's, a whole thing. And as it turns out, he gets kind of caught up all day and doesn't get to see the guy until the next day. And by then, the dude is really pissed and feeling like he's been made a prisoner when he was promised safe passage. Nikolai, meanwhile, has to keep the apparat at arm's length because he keeps insisting that this is an interrogation. And, I have many questions for this heretic. Yuri Vedinin is Vedinin? Yuri Vedinin. What a hard name to say. Why is that so hard? Is my guest, said Nikolai pleasantly. Take our guest to the Iris suite and make sure he's adequately fed and watered. I'll join you shortly. Lies. He did not join them shortly. And the apparat says, forgive me, your highness, but a creature like this cannot be trusted. Pray, go on, said Zoya. I'd like to see if an excess of irony can actually kill a man. Oh, Zoya, you are just so wonderful. I love you so much. So, we go, this whole thing with the apparat. I'm going to have to speed up here. But it ends with him being paid off with some churches. And Zoya still feeling like this is not the kind of negotiation that they should be engaging with because this guy is scum. And everybody who has gotten involved with him has wound up either dead or screwed somehow. And then we have her, she's going and doing her chores, overseeing squalors, helping Genya with the organization of this massive party. And we get to find out about how she had no qualms about taking the Darkling's old quarters. Nobody else wanted to stay there, but she was like, oh, I will love to take something that used to be his and make it mine and take it away from him, which is very much the kind of energy I also carry. And she gets interrupted in the middle of the night by Tamar to tell her that Nikolai got out and somehow unlocked his restraints. We don't really it's just said he has learned to pick his own locks, but I just don't think that's what happened. So they track him, and as it turns out, because I was asking, how do they track this guy? If you remember, it turns out being a squaller, she's able to sort of feel the currents of the air, and she can sense not only him on the wind and the feel of him moving, but also the feel of Merzost, brushing against her power, as it says. I think that's really cool. I really like that explanation a lot. So they track him, and he sort of goes into this one spot that lures Tolya and Tamar away and then moves to a bell tower. And long story short, Zoya faces off with him in a way that she hasn't yet, because every other time she's caught up with him, he's already fed on something. And he's sated enough that she isn't the prey by the time he arrives. But this time, he's looking at her with his, jaw hanging open and drool falling out of his mouth. So he comes at her, and Nikolai, I'm going to be furious if you try and eat me. And you know what I'm like when I'm mad. And she tries to say all these different names to attempt to sort of like knock him out of a trance that she seems to imagine he's in. Captain, Sturmhond, Sobachka, stop this. She raised her arm again. The gust drove the creature back, but its claws gripped the wooden floor and it plowed forward. It opened its mouth and spoke. Zoya. She flinched. The monster did not speak. It could not. But it wasn't even the shock of speech coming from the creature's lips that so frightened her. That was not Nikolai's voice. It was soft, cool as glass, familiar. No, it couldn't be. Fear was clouding her mind. Is it the Darkling? I don't want it to be. I don't want it to be. God damn it. And that's all that he gets to say. But, I mean, what more do you need? I don't like it. And she doesn't tell him about this. You know, we see their meeting later where they talk to Yuri, and she doesn't mention, like, it seems like there's just a tension between them now because of him attacking her that is preventing an open conversation about what really happened. I don't even know how much Nikolai really remembers about attempting to attack her. You know, like, if this thing was fully in control of him in a way that it seems to be attempting to take over, does he recall any of that? Ugh. And now they have all of these people heading to the palace where they thought they had things sort of under control for the moment. And they're finding out that this fucking thing can, like, pick chains and get the fuck out. This is a real problem. And they can't cancel in any capacity that makes them look strong. Every excuse that they could potentially put forth is going to make them sound weak, indecisive, potentially incompetent. Like, it's just, there's no good options. So I'm going to go to Nina briefly. Because I really do want to focus mostly on what's going on with Nikolai this time, because Nina's chapter is mostly heart-wrenching, but doesn't have as much to do with the plot anymore. It has to do with Nina as a character, but I have to kind of pick and choose. I will say I definitely cried during this, like, chapter, especially towards the end here, because this is her finally saying goodbye to Matthias and burying him. And there's no comfort given, which I really appreciate. You know, I think a lot of the time it's tempting for writers to include something to soften a death and make it feel like they're still with you. And that's something that you may grow to feel in time. But at the moment of saying goodbye, it's just the clarity of never getting to see this person again. And as she says, never hear his voice again, which is one of those things that I say to people all the time to please, like, record their loved ones and stuff, because that's the stuff that you'll forget. Little nuances about the way they talked or moved. The fact that we have that ability now is valuable, and I wish that more people would take the time to do that. But yeah, I was really moved by the way this was written, so I don't want to rush through it because I feel like it was done so well. But I do want to, like, focus on what's happening with the information we're getting from Yuri. So, and there's some conversation too. I should mention that Adrik is the one that comes to help her dig the grave, although she really does the digging. But, you know, he has only the one arm, so he can't really do that. And as he's coming out with her, she mentions about him obviously like caring about Leonie. He's like, I wouldn't cross that line. I'm in command. And she's like, yeah, well, for now. And he asks how Matthias died. And I had forgotten that she says he wouldn't tell me who was responsible. I don't remember who shot him. Does it matter now? Do we know who it was? And are they still alive? I can't even recall. I can't believe that I've forgotten. I probably should go back and reread the ending of that. And he says, vengeance was all that drove me at the end of the war. I wanted the Darkling to pay for my arm, for the lives of my friends. I wanted him dead. She says, and you got your wish. And yet my arm didn't grow back. None of my friends came back to life. I could help with that, Nina said, and was relieved when Adric laughed his dry, reluctant chuckle. And everybody is sort of horrified by her powers being inverted. So she always appreciates it when somebody takes it sort of in stride. And this is when we get the flashback to what she had been like as a child, and that she was always happy and friendly and looking on the bright side and reaching out to people and trying to make them comfortable. And then we find out, like being bullied was how her ability sort of popped. And as she's leaving, she's a merry child, Bobby Inessa had told the Grisha woman in her red kefta. Try not to break her of it. No one has, Nina. No one ever will. I'm not so sure, Matthias. War hadn't done it. Captivity, torture. But loss was something different because she saw no end to it. Only the far horizon stretching on and on. Yeah, I can understand that. It does change. It doesn't ever go away. But it changes and becomes different and easier to bear in some ways. But I do get what she means. So she finally asks Adric to leave her by herself to say goodbye. And she just gives him some words of, what he meant to her, doing her best to keep it together because she feels like she owes it to him to not completely lose it here. And then there's this moment that the voices of the dead are sort of interrupting, and she's realizing the chorus was real, but Matthias's voice was not. It never had been. You were never here, she whispered, the tears coming hard now. You were never here. All this time, she had wanted to believe that he was still with her, but it had been her voice all along, talking herself through the silence, forcing herself to do the work of living, when all she wanted was to let go. Goodbye, Matthias. No one answered. She was alone in the silence. And that's what I mean by the author doesn't offer comfort here, because sometimes death isn't, you don't get it, that's just how it can be. So I don't know. I really appreciated that. But now we'll go to Nikolai. Again, like I said, the whole thing with Zoya has soured stuff between them a little bit. And he kind of one-ups her at a moment that seems to hurt her here. She says, the boy is a lunatic, a zealot. He worships the feet of the man who started a civil war and murdered half of the Second Army. And he replies with, he worships an ideal. It's something we've all been guilty of at one time or another. Zoya turned away, but not before he saw the hurt on her face. Zoya Nazyalensky did not flinch, but the pain had been unmistakable. Nikolai wanted to stop the meeting and he didn't know what exactly, but he didn't know what the correct response to almost killing someone was. But he did know that the correct response to almost killing someone was not to try to score points off them the next day. So they bring this kid in, and he's a little irritated about being left under guard for a full day when he was told that it was just for breakfast. And when Nikolai starts to introduce people, Yuri, may I introduce? No, you may not. I wish to speak on the matter of the Starless one, and abruptly Yuri straightened. His eyes widened and his jaw went slack as he looked around the room and seemed to finally register where he was. He clapped his hands like a soprano about to sing. "Oh!" the monk gasped. "Oh, it's you! It's all of you! Moi servienne, it's an honor." He turned to the members of the triumvirate and bowed deeply. He bowed a second time. "An absolute honor." Down he went again. "A dream, really." "Do stop that," Zoya said. "You look like an oil derrick." Oh my God. That's so good. And of course, she continues with, "Do you realize that every member of us fought against your starless saint?" Yes. And he's, states what they all did. But in this way, David Kostik, the great fabricator who forged the first amplifier worn by Sancta Alina herself, Zoya Nazielensky, who was one of the Darkling's most favored soldiers, and then, of course, Genya Safin, the first tailor who bears the marks of the Darkling's blessing. What? Zoya is about to do something. And Nikolai has to step in and be like, "Everybody chill. Yuri, shut the fuck up," is essentially the vibe. And Yuri says that he means no offense, and it turns out he's 18, which makes this a lot more understandable. Just being that young, I mean, we all remember. For all I know, if you're listening, you may be that young. But let me tell you something. You may think that you have some insight because you are not clouded by age and complacence, which might be somewhat true. But complacence comes from experience of knowing that you don't know anything. There's a certain amount of, oh my God, I am so overwhelmed at all that I have found out I am stupid about that I don't want to keep attempting and getting slapped down again because I am now aware how little I know about the world. So there's that sense when you're young that you can see more clearly, that you know better, that you are piecing things together that older folks whose minds are either a little bit too conservative or inside the box may be missing. And perhaps occasionally that's true, but it's true much, much less frequently than you think it is. And him cheerleading for this cause, I think there's more to it than what we see here. He says that the Darkling is coming to him in visions, and I think that's true. I think he is. Something's going on. Aside from that, picking up a cause that's actually this controversial makes a lot of sense as a teenager. This is just, it just makes sense to me a lot. And I love this moment. David, just a moment. What was your name? Yuri Vedinin, moi sovereignty. Yuri, if you upset my wife again, I will kill you where you stand. The monk swallowed. Yes, moi sovereignty. Oh, David, Genya said, taking his hand. You've never threatened to murder anyone for me before. Haven't I? He murmured distractedly, placed a kiss on her knuckles, and continued reading. Fucking David. I love him. What a beautiful character. And yeah, definitely big dick energy. Just, I'll kill you. No problem. I'm just going to tell you, just don't do it. And I'm going to go back to reading because I can't be bothered. So this is when Yuri reveals that he knows the Darkling's the one that created the fold. It wasn't as the story had been circulated, one of his ancestors. And he talks about the miracles, and then when they begin to put the pins on the map, it becomes very clear the miracles are concentrating closer and closer to the area where the fold had been. And this is when, let's see, there are some who believe the Darkling did not die and is simply awaiting his chance to return. His martyrdom was his body being destroyed, but the power was extraordinary. It may be gone, or it may still live on in the world, and his spirit with it. Nikolai did not like what he was hearing. A scrap of that power still resided within his own body, and if last night was any indication, it was growing stronger by the day. So, this is when he begins to put the pins in the map, and they keep, it forms a pattern, although at one point Nikolai is kind of like, yeah, but you could assign any of these to your, the miracles of the Darkling. We don't know what these actually are. And the guy was like, I mean, I do. You can believe what you want, but I absolutely know what this is. And he, later on, when Yuri is sent out, points to everybody, I have always flown northwest toward the area where the fold is. So I know that you guys don't want to trust this dude, and I know that none of us want to think that the Darkling's power remains, but there has to be something to this because this creature keeps on carrying me in that direction. And Yuri, when he's being asked, why, what if you're lying, is just I don't have a reason to lie. And only days ago, a sign appeared on the fold, a lake of black rock, a sun in eclipse. Zoya expelled an exasperated breath. Or a geological anomaly. Yuri poked his bony finger at the map. This is not just where the Starless one passed from this life. It's a place of ancient power, the very place the Darkling first ruptured the world and created the fold. You can't possibly know that, Zoya said with a dismissive wave. And when she asks how he does, because he insists he does, he says it was in a bunch of children's books, is what she calls them, but holy texts is what he calls them. And he says, this is where it gets interesting, the place where Sankt Felix was pierced by the apple boughs, an ancient place of healing and glorious power where men came to be purified. Nikolai sat up straighter. Purified of what, exactly? Yuri opened his mouth, closed it. I misspoke. No, he didn't, said Tolya. He's talking about the Obisbaya, aren't you, monk? So, it turns out that the first Lantsov king, in an effort to maintain control of their borders, they didn't have Grisha, it sounds like. He says there's no second army. Ravka's soldiers just fought and died as other men did. I can't tell if this means that Grisha, other than these men who shapeshifted, just didn't exist, or if it's meant to be that they were unaware of their power or in hiding or what. I think it's supposed to be that these dudes who step forward are sort of the origin of Grisha power. But a group of monks arrived and offered to fight by his side. When they went into battle, they could take on the shapes of beasts: wolf, dragon, hawk, bear. The king had heard stories of these monks, but hardly believed they were true until he saw the miracles for himself. They asked for neither gold nor land, but only that one of them would always remain at the king's side so that Ravka would forever be devoted to the worship of the saints. Weird. But the battle went for so long that when it came time for them to return to human form, they couldn't do it. Their leader brought them to the site of an ancient thornwood, and there they endured a dangerous ritual, the Obisbaya. Those who survived became men once more, and their leader took his place beside Yaromir. Eventually, the priest who held the office closest to the king was given the title of Apparat, and the holy soldiers that surrounded him became the priest guard. Huh. I'm just like, and this is Antolia says, some people claim the first priest guard were Grisha. Tamar says, in that version, the animals they became were the first amplifiers. Their spirits made the monks' powers stronger. And of course, Nikolai's whole, like, the purging of a creature so that you can become a man again is deeply interesting. And he asks for more information, and this monk doesn't really have a lot to offer. And so Nikolai agrees to give him some books in his room. And I love this bit. Nikolai understood. There had been a time when words had been the only place he could find solace. No book ever lost patience with him or told him to sit still. When his tutors had thrown up their hands in frustration, it was the library that had taught Nikolai military history, strategy, chemistry, astronomy. Each spine had been an open doorway whispering, "Come in, come in. Here is a land you've never seen before. Here is a place to hide when you're frightened, to play when you're bored, to rest when the world seems unkind." Yuri knew that solace. He had once been a scholar. Perhaps he'd like to be one again. So he says, perhaps I can get you access to some reading materials. And Yuri is really struggling here with, getting to perhaps access this stuff again versus continuing to be what amounts to a prisoner and keep some of his dignity as well as his objective in mind. So he leaves, and there's an argument over just generally his perception of everything. Genya is the most generous, I think, in that she's like, of course he's drawn to the Darkling's power. All of us were at some point. That was like how he worked. But Zoya just does not want to see it that way, which I understand. And they talk about the fold as like whether or not it remains and if there is still power. And Nikolai brings up how often he has traveled in that direction. And let's see. He proposes traveling there before this huge gathering. We'll make sure Yuri is disguised, and I don't intend to take a direct route. There may be something we can learn at the other miracle sites, and visiting them will give me an opportunity to walk among my subjects before I choose a bride. We have armies massing at both borders, new Lansov pretenders cropping up to make claims on the throne. Our coffers are empty, and our allies are few. I cannot afford to lose the support of the common people. We're going to need it in the days to come. And what if it all leads to nothing? Asked Genya. What if the Darkling left you with this curse, and there are no answers to be found? Zoya laid her fingers flat on the table. What if Yuri discovers the truth about the monster? Then we pray I can silence him and keep this secret long enough to secure Ravka's future. Even without an heir, there may be a way to keep the throne safe and make sure the country isn't left vulnerable. And Zoya asks what it is, and he basically is like, you are going to have to trust me. And she obviously does not like that, because why would she? He turned to the people assembled before him. He needed them to believe, if not in Yuri's tales, then in Nikolai himself. It's not exciting if nothing can go wrong. He felt the monster recoil. Action. Decision. In moments like these, he felt almost like his old self. If this thing wanted to claim his soul, Nikolai intended to give it a damn good fight, and that battle began here, now, with a refusal to relinquish any bit of his spirit to the terror trying to drag him into the dark. He would do what he had always done. He would charge forward, and pray that hope might be waiting, like the roots of the thornwood, just out of sight. So that is the end of chapter 9. So yeah, I'm really, really curious what he's going to find. Because I have to imagine that, maybe there's just like a sort of echo left. That it's not the Darkling, but something, an impression he made there due to the intensity of the power, I hope. I'm going to have to wait and see. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you again to Joanna for commissioning this episode. And I will be seeing you again soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.